Thank you for the elaborate introduction, Anna. It's actually Fleming who always requests that I introduce myself when I speak. So I'll do that just for you, Fleming, so you can remember that I am not Danish, funnily enough. I'm Australian. I've been, yes, thank you, Bo. Wow. If that's the atmosphere here tonight, we're off to a good start. So I'm Australian. I've been coming to the church here for about 6 years. Love this place. So blessed to be a part of this community. I generally come at night, so I recognize most of you, but if you're new or I don't know you, then yes, I am Ben, and I'll be doing it in English tonight. So, I wanted to update you on a little milestone in my life. I mean, people have different major events in their lives. They get married, they buy their first home, they get the family dog, they have their first child, some do, some have a second child. And I want to introduce to you my big moment, which is I am the proud owner of this cactus. Yes, thank you. Yeah. It's a big moment for me. I've never owned a plant before that I haven't killed. I've had a couple of ones in the office, but I forgot to water them, and funnily enough, they died eventually. But the cactus I thought was the indestructible option. I thought this is bulletproof. So I went hunting for a cactus. Did you know there is a shop on Jægersborgade that's 100% dedicated to selling cacti? Yes. Isn't that incredible? I'll tell you why it's incredible, because when I went to buy it, I asked the woman, what's kind of the secret that, look, I don't exactly have a green thumb, I've got a bad track record as a plant serial killer. What is the secret tip to make, and she leans into me and she just goes, look, I'll let you in on a secret. It's so easy. You just need to give it lots and lots of sunshine. And I'm like, we're in Denmark. Like, we're going into winter. Are you serious? What am I meant to do? I had a panic attack. Anyways, I carried it home with me, put it up in my balcony area. This was September. And I thought, okay, it's fine. We've got a couple of months. Good weather still. We'll be fine. We'll get through this cactus. 3 days later, they put up scaffolding over our entire building to do work on the roof. So my cactus was in darkness along with me for about 4 months, and then we had the rest of the winter. But I just wanted to report that this morning. My cactus has had some sunshine. It's looking, if I do say so myself, quite amazing. We've survived the winter together. So the cactus got me thinking about seasons and how much I love seasons in Denmark, particularly those long winters. Springtime, coming out into springtime, actually seeing the sun for the first time in 5 or 6 months. So the cactus has kind of inspired me to dig a little bit into scripture and see what God's perspective is on seasons in our own lives. Before we go any further, I thought we could pray, and then we'll kick off. Dear Lord, thank you that you've gathered us here today. Thank you for such a beautiful day where we can enjoy sunshine and spring weather. I pray that you'd speak to us tonight, Lord. I ask that you would speak personally to each of us, wherever we're at, whatever season we find ourselves in, Lord. I ask that you would share something new about who you are and what you want for our lives. I ask that we'd be receptive to that, and that we might go away this week with a new word, a new inspiration in our hearts. In your name, amen. So I want to talk today about seasons, because I think seasons are something that we've all experienced, not just of the weather variety, but seasons come and go. Seasons that affect our relational lives, our financial lives, our careers, our health. Things are constantly running in seasons, and that can be really difficult at times. But God has a plan that actually supersedes anything that's seasonal here on earth. My experience of seasons in Denmark was this. When I arrived in 2007, that was Roskilde Festival. Was anyone at Roskilde Festival in 2007? No, because you're all alive and here. The rest are still swimming somewhere. It was a disaster. I remember I was backpacking from Australia up to Denmark, and I'd planned it. So, I was planning it very meticulously over 6 months so that I'll arrive in Denmark at the right season, summertime. So I arrived here the week after Roskilde, and it was, if you can remember, it was the worst summer of all time, or one of the worst. It just didn't stop raining. It was also the moment that I was very quickly introduced to the Danish obsession with talking about the weather. People were almost like strangely excited about how bad the weather was. It was like, have you seen how cold it is outside? I'm like, yes, I'm wearing my winter jacket. It's like, have you seen how much rain we got yesterday? It was flooded. People were almost like, everyone's talking about the weather. Oh, have you seen the weather? Tomorrow the weather's going to be amazing. Oh, the weather. And that hasn't stopped in the last 10 years that I've been here. But I love that as well. I come from Australia, and for most parts of Australia, it's very stable climate. So we don't talk about the weather much. It's a bit like I hear in LA where the climate is very stable, people talk about traffic. How was the traffic? Oh, did you take that route here? How did you get here? How long did you wait in traffic? It's like their common thing. In Australia, it's probably sport. We obsess over sport. The weather's not that interesting to us. But Danes love the weather. And when I arrived, I actually hit an unexpected season. In my personal life, because the reality was that when I arrived here, I'd been invited by a couple of Danish friends who I studied with in Melbourne, but I didn't really have a plan. So I arrive in Copenhagen, I have no job, no real friendship network, no family, and no plans, and a lot of time to think. So the next 3 to 4 months, looking back on it, had a profound effect on who I am today. I felt like once all the distractions were stripped away, that God did a lot of work in me. And it was quite painful, and it was quite difficult, and I felt very insecure through the process. And that hasn't completely gone away, but that season I look back with actually great fondness now, even though at the time it felt like a bit of a desert experience. As I said, we in our own spiritual lives experience seasons all the time. Have you experienced before a time where you just feel like you're wandering in the desert? Where you're shouting out to God and you just feel like he's so distant? Do you experience other times where you feel like he's right there? That when you're praying that you're just talking to a friend? My main point tonight is that we might be surprised by the season we find ourselves in, but God isn't. I want to read from a passage in Ecclesiastes 3. It's on screen here. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, and a time to give up. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to mend. A time to be silent, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. It's I don't know about you, but when I read that passage, I find that to be quite intimidating, maybe is one of the words. It's very much reaching out at you and making some very bold statements, and some things that aren't that enjoyable to look at. I don't want to be reminded that I'm going to die, but it starts out with a time to be born, a time to die. To understand this passage better, I think it's important that we look at who wrote it, and that was Solomon, son of David. He was the wisest, richest man in all the land. So here's a guy who had everything at his disposal. And beyond that, he had wisdom, so he had really good perspective. Now, when he starts writing Ecclesiastes, I just want to read in the first chapter, his very first words in the book of Ecclesiastes are, literally, this is what he says: meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. It's very motivating, isn't it? It would have made him really popular in his day, I'm sure, just walking around saying that. I mean, he's just in utter despair at this point. By chapter 3, where we read this passage, it's almost as if he's recalibrating his thinking from, okay, life sucks and it's really hard, but somehow we can actually overlay God's plan and things look rather different. He understood that there are good things in life, but the bad things can't be escaped. He writes, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. There's this poetry in this list, all of these different seasons, facets of life. It's beautiful, yet it also has a dark tinge to it. It reminds us of the inevitability of evil, of problems in the world, and the relentless monotony of seasons. Have you encountered that before, where you just feel like seasons are just spinning, you're just going through the motions? Solomon can totally relate to that. But there are 3 points that I'd like to highlight from the text that I think take us kind of beyond that thinking of just despair, where Solomon finds himself in his wisdom, having wrestled with God and coming out the other side. My first point is seasons are unavoidable. I think if anyone was to tell you otherwise, they'd be lying. It'd be like someone saying to you in Denmark, oh, the weather's always good. Don't worry about it. Just pack your Hawaiian shirt, you'll be fine. Bank on it. That would just be like living in denial. We all go through seasons all the time. The interesting thing that I find is that if you look around at culture, a lot of what the media and often social media and everything around us is telling us that, oh, you can, if you're not happy, make a change. You can control your own happiness. You can control your own season. It's up to you. Not feeling inspired? Just read that book that you should get. Not feeling that you like your job? Find another one tomorrow. Not happy? Book another holiday. Have something to look forward to. There's this constant vacuum, this idea, Amazon, Amazon's great, but Amazon, the online, service has built itself on the fact that at an impulse, if I'm feeling lonely and bored at 10 o'clock on a weeknight, I can go online and just buy whatever I want. And I can have it shipped and delivered the next morning to make myself feel, oh, wow, cool. I've got a new watch coming my way. It's this idea that we have constant distraction. But what Solomon's getting at here is, no, that's not how it's going to be. There are certain realities to life. There are certain rhythms that are unavoidable. Solomon makes it very clear that there are going to be times that are joyous, sure. There are going to be great times in your life, but there's also going to be some painful chapters. There's also going to be some times where you're just indifferent, where you're thinking, I'm just going through the motions. The key is that you're not really in control of the season that you're in. God knows about it and he cares deeply about us throughout our seasons, but it's not something that you can control yourself. And don't try and ignore it. I mean, that was the worst thing that you can do. It just makes me think of those guys that just go around training in shorts and t-shirts in the wintertime. You know those people that it's just like, are you just trying to pretend it's summertime? It's the middle of winter. It's snowing. Put some long pants on. Anyways, that's just a personal issue I have with some people. But I just feel like it's this denial that it's like, oh, okay, it's March. It should be warm. I'm just wearing I'm cool. It's like frost developing on their hair. Seasons are inevitable. Point 2, seasons reveal our character and also that of God's. Both my parents come from farming families in Australia, and that's generational all the way back to, I guess, when our ancestors stole a loaf of bread and were sent to Australia from England at one point. We haven't gone that far back in the family tree, probably out of fear. But all of my ancestors have been farmers, and they settled in an area of South Australia which is actually described as marginal land. Marginal land means you can farm there, but good luck. You might get some crops, you might not. It's borderline desert. So they have farms the size of Amma or slightly bigger. So they're big, big properties out there. And my dad used to always describe growing up on the farm as being an experience, a true test in one's character. The fact that you would go out, you would sow the crops, so you would plant all the seeds for the wheat fields in huge properties. And this was prior to there being great tractors available. I'm sure it's changed a lot now, but it was very manual and intensive labor. And you might spend 2 months sowing the seed. And then in this particular part of Australia, you would wait, and then there would probably only be a window of about three or 4 weeks where if it rained, fantastic, you'd get a great crop. If you didn't get those 1 or 2 rains that you'd hoped for, it would just burn off the plants and you'd start again the next year. I've often thought about that because my dad and my mum, who also grew up on a farming community, they have that sense of perspective, and I just don't think you can cheat it. I think, it's of people who have sat in the middle of a field hoping for rain, seeing sometimes that it came, seeing other times that they were disappointed, but going again the next year, and the next year, and the next year. That sense of resolve. Seasonality builds resolve, capacity to resist, capacity to move on, capacity to maintain momentum in spite of disappointments. We are constantly being shaped by seasons. Our character is being formed. I once heard a very successful businessman from Stockholm who built up a mini media empire up there. He was speaking at to a small group of us, and someone asked him straight up from the top, like, look, we'd have very limited time. We just want to know, what's your formula for success? And he just kind of got up and smiled, and he just said, I learned nothing from my successes. And then he just stood there in silence. I just thought that was so profound. It's just utterly profound. I've learned nothing from my successes. He then went on to talk about how he himself had been shaped and refined by disappointments in business, by building new relationships, by trying things, by having things fall through. The seasons of his business had shaped him to the person he was. But it wasn't just through success. In fact, that was where he'd learned nothing. I would contend that the Lord allows for different seasons in our lives in order for us to really understand who He's intended us to be, and that might be very painful at times. He uses His seasons to reveal His goodness and His faithfulness. Time and time again, I've found personally in my life that through the different seasons, God has time and time again revealed Himself to me, but in different ways, different natures of His character. So when I've been lonely, it's been the comforting Father aspect of God. When I've lost all perspective, He's been the guiding wisdom in my life. The final point is that seasons give us perspective. Seasons help us understand something that's incomprehensible. The notion of eternity. Have you ever sat there and tried to think, doesn't it blow your mind? Like it's one of those, it's like on and on and on and on and on, and it's just beyond our comprehension. Well, I would argue that our own dissatisfaction with life and the monotony of life, the seasonality, points to God's bigger picture. God has put eternity in our hearts, which means we're never going to find ultimate satisfaction in our lives here on earth. We might enjoy certain seasons, but they'll come and go, and then we'll be longing for the next season or the new season. True fulfillment is in eternity. Augustine wrote something that I thought was very applicable, which was, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find peace in you. Are you dissatisfied at all in your life? Have you experienced dissatisfaction recently? I would encourage you that that's actually a gift from God. It inspires us to find true meaning, to find ultimate satisfaction in Him, getting to know His character better. There are words from Isaiah that I find most encouraging when we're looking at having a God view of the master plan. For my thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Thank goodness sometimes. Man, I've screwed it up a lot. I thought I had the right plan. I thought I was going in the right direction. And under God's grace, it's changed. And he's intervened in an amazing way. And my prayer would be that you experience God's intervention in whatever season you're in. Again, you might be surprised by the season you find yourself in, but God is not surprised by it at all. As I was preparing for tonight, I felt that God laid on my heart 3 seasons, distinct, different seasons that you may find yourself in one of them. And I just wanted to encourage / challenge you in each of these seasons. So I just encourage you, as you're listening to the description of these seasons, see if you identify with it, see if it's something that you feel is spot on, and maybe take away with you the encouragement that comes with it. The first is the storm. Oh, the storm. You feel like things are going up and down. You may be struggling internally. You may be struggling externally with relationships that are falling apart. You might feel that things are just not working. Anything you touch seems to break. You might feel that you just have very little control in your life. Well, I want to encourage you that resting can be an act of faith. The passage in Matthew 8, where Jesus is on the water with the disciples, and he's having a nice sleep. A storm arises. The disciples freak out. They wake him up and say, "What are you doing? Why are you sleeping?" Jesus responds, "Do you think God is going to let the boat sink with me in it?" That's profound. I feel like God's saying, don't worry. Remember, I'm always with you. I have the perfect timing in hand. Don't freak out. My encouragement to you would be not to panic, just to actually rest in him. That act of faith could be a major milestone in your relationship with him. You don't actually have to do anything. He's got it all under control. The second season, somewhat happier one, which I hope some of you have experienced in your time, and I don't know whether you're there at the moment, is spring. The spring. You find yourself in a productive season. You have a surplus, an overschool. You are seeing fruit in your life and the lives of those around you. These are great seasons. Have we all had this season at one time or another? I hope you have experienced that. Unfortunately, they don't always last, but they are a wonderful season to be in. My challenge to you, if you can identify with this season, my challenge would be, what are you going to do about it? How will you step out and be a blessing to others? It's a great time. You're out in the sun. You feel like you're just enjoying the warmth on your face. You know, it's a very lovely, leisurely experience. But throughout the Bible, the challenge from Jesus is, okay, you've experienced that. Now who are you going to tell about it? How are you going to bless others? We are blessed in order to be a blessing to others. Will you do what Fleming mentioned a couple of months ago? Do something radical and practical, like open your home up. Invite friends over for a meal. Be deliberate about relationship with others. With your neighbors. Do you know your neighbors? Is it an opportunity for you to speak into their lives? Mentor someone. Have you considered spending an hour a month to meet up with someone and see how they're going and invest in them? Capitalize on this season. It won't last forever, but you have a role to play when you're in it. The final season. A bit more of a tricky one. It's the fog. If you were asked to consider what season you're in and you honestly don't know, the chances are you might be in the fog. You lack clarity. You feel like you can't see beyond your immediate circumstances. In some ways, you feel like you're maybe in a transition period or the opposite, a frustrating loop that's just going around and around. Things are hazy. You're lacking clarity. I want to encourage you that God is big enough. He actually loves, my experience is, he loves it when we talk to him, shout to him, wrestle with him. He's big enough. Believe me, he can handle our complaints. He can handle our dissatisfaction with the season we're in. And my encouragement to you would be, use this as an opportunity to press into him, get to know him better through the process, ask for clarity. He's absolutely big enough to handle this situation.